How are you?
Everyone. Good to see you. Good to be with you. I'm going to invite you all just to settle in and take a couple deep breaths so we can get grounded into this moment wherever you are coming from, whether it's another room in your house or whether it's from an errand. We're just going to take a few moments, and if you're comfortable, either lower your gaze or close your eyes, and finding a comfortable spot with your back, your spine erect, your shoulders relaxed, your palms faced upward in your lap, and just taking a few deep cleansing breaths, breathing in through your nose completely and exhaling completely. Maybe you can even allow for an audible sigh. And again, inhaling completely and deeply through your nose. And exhaling completely through your mouth. And one more time. Feeling your shoulders relaxing. If you have any tight spots in your body, just again, sending them some relaxed energy. And when you're ready, opening your eyes, coming back to our Zoom room. So I am excited to be here with you, teaching the third segment of this Mussar class. And I don't know how many of you were here for the first two sessions. Maybe if you could just give me a show of hands, so I have a sense of who might know or not know. Okay, so we're a little bit under mixed in terms of Mussar and what it is. So I asked that question just because I wanted to give a brief introduction. I know that Leslie Ann gave a really beautiful, thorough hour-long introduction to what Mussar is. And I'm not going to do that. So for those people who were there, if you can indulge me just for a couple minutes so I can catch those who weren't able to hear Leslie Ann speak, just to fill in on what Mussar is. So Mussar is a movement and understanding, part of Jewish tradition, whereby we work on our character traits. And those character traits are referred to as Middot. So some of you who heard Leslie Ann speak might be familiar with the name Dr. Alan Moranis, and he is credited with founding the Mussar Institute. And Leslie Ann was affiliated and speaking on behalf of the Mussar Institute. So many years ago, I had the great privilege of studying with Alan Moranis. And so much of what I'll be sharing with you also comes from my training with him. And I remember learning from him that the Mussar world and the Mussar movement really started in the 1900s with Rabbi Israel Salanter. And he was noticing that the yeshiva bachers, right, those boys who were studying in the yeshiva, were really smart intellectually, right? They could carry on disagreements and understand and arguments and what's called Talmudic peel pool, this sort of the way the discourse unfolds. But they weren't so well equipped, and that we would use, I think the modern day term would be in the social emotional realm. So while they had this great Talmudic, Torah, Mishnaic intellect, the social emotional skills were not necessarily at the same level. And so the Mussar movement was founded in order to teach these character traits, these midots, to these yeshiva students so that they could be more well-rounded human beings. And it became sort of resurrected, I'd say, within the past maybe 15 to 20-ish years, if I have some of my timeline correctly. And it really has come much more into mainstream American Judaism. And basically with these Middot, with these character traits, there are a set number of them. there was a little screen that I know Leslie Ann showed, but they include things like order and generosity, kindness, anger, patience, mindfulness. And basically the way that each of us work with these Middot is to realize that we all have our own, what I like to call spiritual curriculum. We each have our own curriculum, and we come into this world either by nurture or by nature. And some of these developed traits are better massaged and were more easily accessible to us. And others of them need a little bit of tweaking. And so the image that I've used over the years that I would like to offer, and I hope it might be helpful, is if you think of a mixing board, if you have ever seen what in a recording studio, what a mixing board would look like, there are all these knobs, right? There's like the treble and the bass and a million other ones that I don't know what they are. And the way that we work in the Mussar world is really to hone and to tune those dials for ourselves. So let's start with humility, right? If for some of us, humility might come very naturally, and for others of us, less so. And so how do we really tweak and pay attention to that character trait that's specific for us? And through the Mussar process and training, there is a whole procedure, right? So there is journaling that's involved, and studying texts, and talking to a chavruta study partner, and chanting. And through working on this midah, this character trait that you specifically want to hone in on, that process will take you through and you'll become more attuned. So that's really like a very brief overview of the world of Mussar. And where I wanted to go today was to pick one midah, one character trait, and to delve deeply into that trait. So any questions so far about the Mussar world in general? And I see some shaking of our heads. Great. So we're going to look at the trait of savlanut, which is patience. So I don't know where each of you are. Some of you might be incredibly patient, and I hope this still will be of value to you. And others might feel quite impatient. So we're going to look at this quality, this midah, savlanut, related to patience. And we're going to share some texts. I have a whole bunch of texts that come from either the Torah or Mussar books specifically. And then I'm going to invite us to have a conversation. So for those of you who have studied with me before, you know that I'm not going to stand up here and lecture you, because you also have your own inner wisdom. And part of, especially in the world of Mussar, is really getting into dialogue with one another. That work is called chavruta. It's like working with a study buddy. So we're going to do probably more of a large chavruta and really ask for your input based on your understanding of these texts that I'm going to bring to you. So I want to start specifically with this, hoping this is the right text. Are you all seeing this? Savlanut, when I was a young man. All right, so this is, I'm hoping, going to really get us into the world of Mussar. When we look at this quote, it's actually one of my favorites, and it is by Rabbi Israel Salanter. And talks about, so now that we have this sense of what Mussar is, why does it matter, right? Like, it's a lot of work. For those of you who have worked on yourself in any capacity, whether it's being through mindfulness or with a therapist or processing with a friend, like, it's hard work. So what's the purpose of it and what's the benefit? If someone would be willing to read this passage by Rabbi Israel Salanter, hoping that might give us some insight to what the benefit and what the value of this Mussar work is. Is there anyone who'd be willing? Judy, please? Yeah. Great.
When I was a young man, I wanted to change the world, but I found it was difficult to change the world, so I tried to change my country. When I found I couldn't change my country, I began to focus on my town. However, I discovered that I couldn't change the town, and so as I grew older, I tried to change my family. Now, as an old man, I realize the only thing I can change is myself. But I've come to recognize that if long ago I had started with myself, then I could have made an impact on my family. And my family and I could have made an impact on our town. And that in turn could have changed the country, and we could all indeed have changed the world. Cool.
Thank you. So this is really one of my favorite texts, and I'm wondering how it landed for you. What was your experience of it?
It reminded me of a Mark Twain kind of thing, you know.
Yes, how smart his dad became the older he got.
Right.
Yes, that I actually had typed up and pasted on my children's bathroom mirrors so that they could look at it while they were brushing their teeth twice a day, especially during the teenage years. Yes, thank you. Anyone else? Philip and then Susan.
I think probably what resonated with me was I gone to a bunch of different therapists in my life, and my personal relationships have always been lacking. And one of the things that they have told me collectively of all those many hours of sitting and laying on the couch is that if you think you're going to change the other person and make them into what you want them to be, you got to forget it because they ain't gonna change. I've gotten involved with guys who were just had all kinds of issues, and the scary thing was I've been involved with multiple guys who had the same issue but didn't know it going in, which makes am I a dumb or what kind of thing, you know? So, anyways, that would be my thing about it. So.
Yes, thank you. And I'll just say, no, you're not dumb. Some of us are slower learners than others. And if we don't hear what life wants us to learn, then she will provide us with the same opportunity until we can figure out that lesson. Susan.
Well, here's this rabbi who had an epiphany, but I find this sad because had he had this epiphany earlier, he could have made some significant change, but now he's there to share it with us. So perhaps we won't make the same mistake, but kind of sad.
Yes. Yeah, it's sometimes easier to learn from others' mistakes, and sometimes it's really hard. And I think that's also a personality trait, right? Some people are more willing to learn from other people's mistakes. Other people really need to have their own life experiences.
Yeah.
That was another, I was a stay-at-home mom for many years and working part-time. And so as an educator, I saw my house as my classroom, much to my children's dismay. So in addition to the notes that I would leave on the refrigerator and the bathroom mirror, I had purchased a sign that was outside of the area that they played in, this playroom. And it said, "Learn from the mistakes of others. You can't live long enough to make them all yourself." Right? And there are some people in my family for whom it was just like, whoosh, like I need to make the mistake myself. And I really I'm not judging that in any way. It's just about knowing yourself, right? For some of us, if somebody makes a mistake, we're willing to listen to it. And for others, we really need to go through that experience yourself. And it's really about knowing who you are and what works for you. So yes, thank you for sharing that about Rabbi Salanter's reflections in his older age. Any other thoughts before we continue on to savlanut? Savlanut, patience. All right, so you don't have to answer this question out loud. Do you consider yourself a patient person or not? So again, don't answer out loud. This is just an internal checking. Okay. So we're going to look at a whole bunch of sources today. And I wanted to go back to something that Leslie Ann had mentioned specifically about the Hebrew word for patience. Savlanut has the root saval or sabal, depending on if you put a dot in the bet or the vet. So let me quickly bring up the Hebrew so you can see it, making sure we're still on this. Hang on. Oh, I think that was the wrong document that I shared. Let's try this again. All right, you should see this back to where we were, Rabbi Israel Salanter. So let's look specifically at the Hebrew word. So I'm going to highlight it, savlanut, and I specifically have the root, the saval, which is the samech, for those of you that know Hebrew, the bet, and the lamed. And the word literally means to carry or to bear. Right? A porter in Hebrew is a sabal. So how do you think that patience is connected to this Hebrew root to bear or to carry? What might the correlation be? How did that word savlanut, when you have the ut form, it puts it into a noun form, right? So savlanut is patience. How might that connect to carrying or bearing? Any thoughts? It's not an easy question, so I'll give you some think time. And you're free to unmute yourself and answer if you have a thought.
Hi there. This is Maddie. I think unless it's an internal thing that you're born with, I think it takes a lot of work to practice patience. And it's, for me, I can only speak for myself, many times it's a conscious awareness, because I'll get the urge, the impatient feeling. But luckily, most of the time, I can kind of take care of it and remind myself, practice patience now. But it's work. It's, it's silent work nobody sees, but I do work at it.
Yes, thank you for that. Agreed. It is ongoing work. Whether you have a mantra, right, this phrase that you can repeat over and over to yourself when you're in a moment or feeling impatient, maybe do you monitor yourself? What happens when you become impatient? Can you feel your heart racing? Do you start to sweat? Do you have butterflies in your stomach? Like, what happens to you physically? I'm going to give you all each a few seconds to think about that and take yourself back to a place and a time when you were feeling very impatient, and try to connect to your somatic experience. What was happening inside your body at that moment? All right. And now I want to ask you to do the flip. I want you to, if there was a time, and again, this depends on where you are on that Mussar meter, right? Remembering we're going to dial in. So if you can think of a time and a place where you were either very patient or patient for you, depending on where you decide you are on your patience spectrum. So again, take yourself back to that moment in time if you're able to. And what was happening in your body? What were your somatic experiences when you were in that patient space? Yeah, Judy Kornitsky. You have to unmute yourself. Hang on,
there we go.
When I think back to when my children were small, I found, of course, I have much more patience because I'm teaching them, I'm raising them at that time. I find as an adult, especially in conversations, the urge to bite my tongue because I'm impatient and I want to make my comments that are so important that I have to interrupt the other person. But I think I've outgrown that a bit. Actually, one of the best lessons I ever had about patience was a rabbi we had in Leominster, Massachusetts. He was from Brazil, and he wasn't the most erudite rabbi because his English was a problem, blah, blah. But he was the best listener I ever saw, ever experienced in my life. And he made a real impression on me about listening and being patient and what you gain from stepping back and absorbing what you're experiencing. So that's just two examples that came to my mind.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so sometimes when we're in a conversation with someone, you might feel impatient. As Judy said, you want to share what you know the solution to their problem is, right? Or share your lived experience that you are hoping will provide them with whatever they're looking for in that moment. So really being an active listener is an aspect of patience. What else is related to patience vis-a-vis this idea of carrying, right? Remember, we're looking at that Hebrew root word, saval. How is there a connection? Or if you don't or can't see one, that's fine too. And I can share some thoughts from Dr. Alan Moranis and what he has to say about this connection between the ability to bear and carry and our understanding of patience. So any thoughts before I read you some of his words? Ish, a little bit? Is that?
Whenever I hear.
Yeah.
Hang on, one second, Judy. Susan was about to.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I just know when I hear a certain someone say, to make a long story short, I'm like, oh, they're not, it's the opposite. And so I have to, I guess, carry or make my heart slow down and just, make myself be patient. That's what I do.
Yes, thank you. So it's almost like if you're feeling what someone might be sharing could potentially be weighing you down with the longevity or the verbosity, if that's a word. So it's almost like you have to sort of expand your shoulders and carry a little bit more so that you can be patient. Beautiful. All right, Phyllis, and then Anita.
I find that I was trained to have a lot of patience because I was a special education teacher for a long time, but I'm impatient with myself.
Thank you for adding that layer. Why is that the case? Why are we oftentimes so much nicer to other people and more patient and more loving and more generous with other people than we are to ourselves? So that's a conversation for another day and a really, really important one, especially as we are getting ready to gear up and move into the high holiday season in several weeks, to think about what it means to offer self-compassion and self-patience, right? How might we learn to be more patient with ourselves? Anita. Hang on, unmute, please.
Okay. I was going to say that I think I see the connection between the porter and the root bearing and patience, because I think in a sense, when you're in that situation that was just being talked about, you're bearing a burden And that burden is what you carry and you're patient. Okay, but your body, as far as your body changes, if you think about being impatient for a moment, you think about people juggling their foot or their hand, a physical response, their blood pressure probably rising a little bit, being impatient.
Yep.
So yes, I do see the connection.
Great. Thank you for that. And this is, again, just an invitation for each one of us to notice if we're sitting somewhere and we notice our legs start shaking, or we're fidgeting, or we're feeling a little bit of like, okay, I just got to, like, I'm in a rush. I got to go. Just, breathe, right? Just take a deep breath. Okay. Thank you for this opportunity to practice my patience. Right? I'm not going to beat myself up. I'm not going to say, why are you shaking your leg, Amy? What's wrong with you? Why are you so impatient? I'm just going to say, you know what? Okay. Right now is a moment where I recognize I'm being impatient. I'm just going to pause. I'm going to take a deep breath. For those of you who have studied with me before, one of my favorite scenes from a movie is from Evan Almighty. And I am particularly fond of Morgan Freeman and his voice. And so he was a waiter in a restaurant, and I believe that it was patience, but I'm not 100% sure. And he hears two customers talking about patience, and he walks over to them and he says, well, how do you think you get more patience? You think the Lord shows up and hands you patience on a silver platter? No, the Lord provides you with opportunities to learn how to be patient. And so how are we able to shift from like, I want my patience on a silver platter, moving us more into this world of Mussar and mindfulness, and here's what I'm working on. And when I'm presented with an opportunity where I feel those utches inside and I feel my body starting to feel impatient, okay, thank you for this opportunity to practice my patience. And again, as Maddie said, it is an ongoing process. When I was studying with Alan, I studied with him for about a year. And so every week we were given a different character trait and we had to work with it. And I remember standing in the supermarket line at Publix. And it seemed that every time I went to the supermarket, I picked the wrong line. Right. Like, I'm sure that happened. I can tell by your response. I'm not the only one. Right. So I'm standing in line and there's a problem with the register tape has to be replaced and someone's credit card doesn't work. And it happened to be like, it's really interesting. This is like during my week of patience. Okay. I get it. Thank you. I get it. I'm going to pause. I'm going to say thank you for the opportunity to learn how to be patient. So again, I offer this to you as a way to practice this in the next coming weeks and months and even years, if this is part of what you think is your spiritual curriculum, right? For you, you might be super patient. And so maybe there's another trait that you feel you'd like to work on. But for now, let's look at some patient texts together and let's see what the Mussar tradition has to teach us. So let's go to this first text. When something bad happens to you and you did not have the power to avoid it, do not aggravate the situation even more through wasted grief. Read it one more time. When something bad happens to you and you did not have the power to avoid it, do not aggravate the situation even more through wasted grief. So there are a few notes here. The Hebrew term translated as grief is tsa'ar. A more literal definition would be pain and suffering. And so how do you think impatience can add to pain and suffering in a situation? Do you think that patience, which is the capacity to bear the pressures of the moment, reduces the pain and the suffering? If so, in what ways? So I'll give you maybe 30 seconds to reread that text and think about those questions, and then I'd love to hear your responses. First, any questions about the text itself? Does everyone understand it? Right, if we're in this situation that we can't avoid, don't make it worse. And I can't believe this. Why is this happening? It's more wasted grief. Why did this happen? And can't believe it. And like, how does that sort of self-talk lead to more pain and suffering potentially? Or does that help you to expand what you might be able to bear, what you might be able to carry? So I'm curious what your thoughts are about this text. Let's see, we have increases your anxiety. Well, I can't say for sure for everybody, but I do think that there is a component of when we have that gnawing voice of, why is this happening? I can't believe it. Whatever you're going to say to yourself, this is terrible, this is horrible, and how do I get out of this? And didn't happen to this person, but this keeps happening to me. And why me? Like, it exacerbates and adds to one's anxiety. Thanks, Debbie. Maddie.
I think it's normal, certainly in the practice of the decades of my life, to experience frustration and impatience. And it's a learned practice. It's a learned behavior. And now that I'm aware of it, so I'm kind of piggybacking on what I said before, I'm so aware of my physical self feeling it. It's almost like I feel my blood pressure going up. I almost feel like other things are happening. And you know what? It doesn't feel good. And if I can't be in control of that other person, that situation, why am I adding pain to myself, suffering to myself? Why am I piling on stress that is really unhealthy? It's logical, but yet I'm dealing with an emotional experience. And so it's that, like you say, that voice in my head, I talk to myself. It's not the mantra as much as, let it go, let it go. Like, it's not worth it. So there's a phrase that says, sometimes having peace is more important than being right. And that's what I keep in my mind.
Yes, thank you for that. Yeah, yes to everything that you said. Before we hear from Judy K, I just want to verbalize what Philip added in the chat, that it makes your level of being upset deeper and deeper. Yeah, so it does add to that pain and suffering. And he says, my husband often says, I guess it happens to everyone at times. Yes, and we don't always see that, right? We think that everybody else, that nothing happens to anybody else. Well, let me assure you, the second you start talking to someone and they're willing to be vulnerable, your husband is 100% correct. Yeah. Judy.
Well, the past 2 years, I've dealt with a lot of physical problems. And the physical, I'm very big into the mind-body connection. So when the physical starts, I react emotionally. But I write a blog every day. When my husband took ill before he passed, people would ask how he's doing. So I started to write letters to my 5 children, and then it expanded, and now there's 25 people following me. And I just had another unfortunate physical problem. And I find that I've learned to cope with it. What I can't control, I can cope with. And I detour around whatever it is, because otherwise I would just be a complete mess. So it is work. And I've never blamed anybody, God or anybody, for what's happened to me. I had no control over it, but I've learned how to sort of cope with it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's true. I often say, sadly, we don't get to control what happens to us in life, the only thing that we can control is how we respond. Right? Like we get to decide how we respond, how we want to show up, and we don't get to pick the hand that we're dealt, so to speak. And I think that patience connects to, as Judy just shared, like to be able to bear and carry what it is, whether it's physical illness, whether it's loss. Yes, Debbie adds in especially true with illness, right? Like we don't get to pick, but how we are able to bear that and carry it. And there's another piece that I would also like to offer. This is not necessarily from the world of Mussar, but from the world of Amy. And that is that when we have these very heavy loads to carry, it's helpful to find community to help us. When we have friends, when we have family, as you said, Judy, this blog grew from 5 to 23, I think you said. So the more that we can share whatever it is that we are carrying or that we are burdened with or that we feel impatient around, perhaps it will lighten the load. And I especially, I see Debbie commenting, TBE community was and is so supportive during illness.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So it's such an honor to be part of the Bethel community and to be learning with all of you. And I'm so grateful that you feel that. I mean, I feel that as part of the staff, and just knowing that there are other people out there, clergy, fellow congregants, staff, assistants, administrators, who also care deeply about this community. And so in those moments when we're feeling impatient, if we don't have an answer, we don't have a diagnosis, or we don't have an immediate solution, to know that we are here as a temple community to support you and to support each other. So yes, Miriam. Oh, hang on, you are muted.
Okay. Through the years, I've learned to be aware of being an actor rather than a reactor, because the way we react to a situation is not as helpful as saying to ourselves, how can I act upon this situation and not get all subbushed?
Great, thank you. Yes, very nice. Thank you for that addition. Okay, let's look at another text, see what Rabbi Israel has to say. Anybody want to read this? Judy L., would you be willing to read this second text?
Rabbi Israel was critical of those who learn fast. If people learn without depth and understanding, how will they cultivate awe and humility? Thoughts of Mussar, page 10.
So I'm going to give you each maybe 15, 20 seconds to think about this for yourself. And then the questions underneath, what kind of learner are you? When you learn something new, do you want to just chop, 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 get to it, learn the details? Or do you want to take time and maybe have a dictionary next to you to look up words that you don't understand, and then you get sucked down the Wikipedia dictionary hole? Or right, like how do you learn? And do you stay in a place long enough to cultivate a deeper understanding? And then how does that bring about awe and humility? So I'm going to give you about 15, 20 seconds for you to reread the text and think about your answer to those questions. All right, let's hear what your responses are. What kind of learner are you? Are you a patient learner? Are you an impatient learner? And is there a connection between awe and humility through the process of learning? I hope you're not getting impatient with my depth of questioning. These aren't very easy questions. You're showing up at a lunch and learn, and I'm really, getting you into this Mussar world of asking these deep questions. So, thoughts? Yes, Maddie.
I find for me it's situation sensitive. If a situation speaks to me, and it's always evolving, if I have the time, if it's higher on my priority list, if I have a curiosity, sometimes I do overload myself, so I need a vacation. So it's always, it depends. And sometimes I kind of put it on the side and save it because I can't deal with it right now. I think in my retirement, I've become very fluid. I've learned that. And I've learned to take advantage of the fact that I can do these things at my pace.
I so appreciate you adding that real clarification, right? It's situation dependent, right? If you have, I don't know, let's say you're on vacation and you have a rental car and you have 5 minutes to learn how to work your car to get out of the parking garage so you can head to your next event, you might be a really impatient, fast learner. Tell me what to do, like where are the brakes, where are the lights, right? If you happen to be on vacation and you're sitting on a lounge chair or you're retired and you have more time and more space, you might be able to go deeper because of the circumstance or the situation that you're in. So thank you for adding that. I really appreciate that. Any other thoughts about your own sense of learning and how you might connect it to awe and humility? I thought that was
I think about when I go on Safari or Google, they have a whole bunch of questions underneath the question that I asked and a whole bunch of information. So it's easy to keep going and get involved and learn.
Yes. And then is there a way that you would connect that to awe and humility?
Yeah. Sometimes I didn't see the connection myself until I saw examples that were applied to me and hit home.
Yeah, so it's this sense of almost the more one gets in the educational rabbit hole in the best sense, it's like, wow, I didn't realize how much information was out there and how that connected to this and this connected. Oh, it's humbling. There just aren't enough hours in the day in my life to read all the books that I want to read. And it's like, that's a very sad realization that I've just had to come to accept. Like, there's just so much information out there. I remember seeing something recently, and I can't remember what it is at the moment. And I just remember thinking to myself, how could I have reached this age of my life and not known about this topic? Right? Like, this is somebody else's passion. They're an expert in it. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I didn't even know that this was a thing. Right. And this sense of awe and humility. So I saw Philip had his hand. Let's have Philip and then Judy K.
I'm in the process of learning conversational Hebrew on Zoom from Israel.
Wow, yafeh ma'od.
Yeah.
Very, very good is what I said.
Yeah, I know, I understand.
Not you. If other people didn't speak.
I understand. I'm pretty far along. I mean, in the beginning, but it's, what your point is, it's so much. And, and it's, I speak French pretty well, but Hebrew is different. It's like, the masculine verb and the feminine verb and all this stuff. And I say it's enough already. But as far as, impatient with, am I ever going to get any better at this? I've been doing it for maybe 3 months or something, maybe. And it's and they give you all this stuff to learn and all this stuff. And sometimes you feel like I'm just not getting anywhere. And then I sit down and I think, not that long ago, I couldn't make sense of words with no vowels. And they don't put vowels in anything. And I'm starting to realize that I can read without vowels, which I didn't think I would ever be able to do. So then that part of it makes me feel like I've done something, even though I'm so aggravated with myself that I'm not doing better. That a few weeks ago, I couldn't read without vowels. Now I can.
Wow.
I think
Wow, that's great. And that's a great example, right? This sense of like being impatient with ourselves, which goes back to what we've spoken about before. How do we be a little kinder? Well, you just figured it out. You did a little compare and contrast and said, I couldn't do this a few months ago and now I can. So yay me, right? Yasher koach.
That's kind of what
well done.
That's what I was doing. So
that's great. Thanks for sharing that. Judy K.
I agree with everything you said, Rabbi, about the number of books and all the learning out there. I'm a librarian, and one of my goals when I retired was to start getting through all those books that I never had time for. I love to learn, and I find it an honor to be able to go through and figure out and follow those markers to learn more. And I too am overwhelmed by the things I read and didn't realize were happening in the world.
Yes. Yeah. And, I think it connects really beautifully to this sense of awe and humility.
Yes,
like
absolutely.
The sense of how big, and depending on where we're looking, how beautiful our world is. Absolutely. And the sense of humility of just like, I'm like this, like I'm smaller than this. I'm a total just speck of sand. And going back to that first quote from Rabbi Salanter, yes, I'm this speck and I'm going to work on myself. And I'm going to work myself, hopefully will impact my family, and my family will impact my town, and my town will impact my community, and my community will ultimately impact the world, right? So it's sort of standing in this paradox, which is a very Jewish place to be. It's the and, it's not the either or. It's yes, I am this speck and I can impact the world, right? So how do we fit, since we're working on this midah, this character trait of patience, how do we fit patience into that conversation, right? Like, I just want to learn to be, I don't know, a great skier. So I'm just going to show up on the bunny slopes and like the next day I'm going to be a black diamond, right? We all know that's not how it happens unless you happen to be like a skiing savant, and I don't even know if they exist. I imagine somewhere there is one, right? But like, how are we patient and kind to ourselves to say there's so much information. I'm going to pick this one area that I want to explore. I'm going to be kind to myself. I'm going to look back and reflect and say, wow, I couldn't do that a few months ago and now I can. So again, really working with this idea of patience for each one of us, where you are vis-a-vis your ability to sink in, relax, wait, accept what is, versus your desire to move forward, to control, and depends on the situation, as Maddie said, right? Sometimes it's really important to be impatient, right? Like, chas v'chalila, God forbid, somebody needs to go to the ER. Like, that's not the time to say, I think I'm just going to wait for the ambulance to come. And when the ambulance arrives, it's like, no, that's the time to be impatient. And then when you're sitting with someone, you're maybe sitting with someone, if you happen to take them to the hospital and you're waiting and you want the answer from the doctor, you want to know what's going on. Like, maybe that's not the best time to be impatient. It's the time to say, you know what? They have to run the tests. They need to see what's going on. I'm not going to jump to any conclusions, as challenging as that is. I'm going to be patient, right? So it's really figuring out that dialing meter, that dialing Mussar meter of patience, and what's called for in this situation. So I want to look at one more text before we conclude. And if there is, there are just so many good texts here. I'll try to send this to you. If you drop your name and email in the chat, I can send you this source sheet if you want it, because we are not going to make it through all of them. So let's look at text number 3. Anyone interested in reading that? One of Rabbi Moshe's Hasidim. Any takers? Susan, do you mind?
One of Rabbi Moshe's Hasidim was very poor. He complained to the Tzaddik that his wretched circumstances were an obstacle to his learning and praying. In this day and age, said the rabbi, the greatest devotion, greater than learning and praying, consists in accepting the world exactly as it happens to be. Whoa.
Yeah, I thought, we'd end on a light note. So, some questions. Is it easy or hard for you to accept the world exactly as it happens to be? Do you think that acceptance promotes unhealthy passivity? How might acceptance of reality lead to more effective action? So again, I'll leave these questions up in the text. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to reread the text and the questions, and then we'll spend a few minutes processing. All righty. What are your thoughts on this one? Again, you don't have to answer out loud. This can just be an internal check-in. Where are you in accepting reality as the way that it is right now in the moment for you? And then I'd really like to look at those second questions, the second and the third. Do you think that acceptance promotes passivity, or is the acceptance of reality able to lead to greater action? So what are your thoughts about accepting our lives the way they are? Does that help you become more active, more passive? And then where does patience fit into all of that and carrying this load and what we have to bear? So hoping to really be able to tie up some of what we've looked at today together.
That reminds me of the prayer that the
Serenity Prayer.
Alcoholics
Yes.
Anonymous and other help groups use to accept the things that I can change and have the power to change the things I can and to know the difference between them.
Yes, beautiful. Thank you for adding that. Yes. Susan.
I have a very negative feeling about the world. I see this from the viewpoint of the Holocaust, where so many Jews were like, I'm not going to flee. This is the way it's always been. It's going to get better. We just have to accept it. And it was not a good future for them. So acceptance is not always a good thing.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. So that was part of, it could potentially lead to passivity, like you said, right? And we also saw examples like the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, where it really led to active resistance. So, how is your current life circumstance? I think that you gave a really important global example, Susan. And I want you to also hone in on what's happening in your own internal life, because the work of Mussar, remember, is going to start with ourselves. So are you comfortable? Are you satisfied with what's going on in your life? Do you accept it? Does that acceptance lead to passivity, or does it lead to action? And I imagine the answer could be yes, and yes, both. right? We might be back to where Maddie suggested, that it's circumstantial, right? In certain cases, we accept what's going on. We know we can't change it, as Phyllis shared with the Serenity Prayer, so we're going to accept it. But we also have to have the wisdom to know the difference of when we can make a difference and when we can have the ability to make change. Any other?
Well,
Yeah,
when
no.
the young people say, why should I vote? It doesn't make a difference. And it does make a difference. I don't know what my point is, but I just wanted to.
Please vote. Please vote in the August 23rd primary. Yes.
Yeah,
That
don't be passive.
don't be passive, right? So that's a good example of.
Of it, we got the gist of it.
Yes.
You know, I can't help but think of Al Gore and climate change. My God, if everybody had only listened to him back then, where would we be today?
Yes.
And look, we're headed now.
Yes. Yeah, no, good point. Maddie, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah. I found I'm so grateful to be at this place in my life where I've matured enough to be conscious and make choices. Where can I put my resources at their best? My patience, my time, my energies, my talents. What are the things that I can make an effect on? This is where I am these days. It's a conscious choice. And I think this whole topic has, kind of clued me into, I am so much better today because I have a lot more discipline. A lot more, and maybe it's maturity. I would be more reactive when I was younger. But I have discipline and, discernment. How important is certain things? And the other thing is gift. What gift can I give to those around me? If it's a gift of kindness and patience, oh my gosh, that's worth more than anything. And I think about that as what can I contribute? So, all of this comes to mind when we're talking about it today.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. Thank you. And I see Debbie put in the comments, if you don't try, you'll never see a change. Amen to that. Very, very true. So I want to be mindful of our time and just do a brief summary of where we have traveled together. We started by looking at Mussar in general, how the Mussar movement came into existence, and then read that beautiful quote by Rabbi Israel Salanter about his desire to make big changes in the world. And ultimately, as he grew older, and I would add wiser, he realized that the only change that he can make is in himself. And then there's the ripple effect of when we dial and move the Mussar Middot character trait meter, then that affects us, which affects our families and our towns and our communities and ultimately the world. Then we looked at the specific midah, the specific character trait of savlanut, patience, and we saw the root was saval, which means to bear or to carry. And then we explored the connection between what does it mean to carry or to bear something vis-a-vis patience. We had a whole bunch of really delightful, interesting, wise conversations. Thank you all for your sharing and your vulnerability as we explored specific Mussar texts that related to patience and what it means to study with patience and act in the world with patience. And what does it mean when we don't have patience? And how can we get in touch with what's happening internally so that we can pause for ourselves and say, okay, thank you for this opportunity to be patient. I can feel what's happening internally. So I want to thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to Temple Beth El for this wonderful opportunity to introduce the world of Mussar to our amazing congregants. And I look forward to studying again with you in the near future. And again, final call, if you want the rest of these texts, just if you could put your email in the chat, and I will send out the rest of the document.
Thank you so much.
Thank
That
you
was
so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
My
Thank you.
pleasure. Bye,
Bye.
everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
You too.
Bye.
And of course, a big thank you. Thank you, Ron.
You're welcome.